Welcome in, welcome in. As I always say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are listening to this show, this podcast right here on YouTube. That's 70s Pod, that's 70s Pod with Bryan Lee. Andrew here in Florida, Brian over there in Wisconsin. And holy cow, Batman, we're up to almost 50 episodes. This ringing in as number 47, episode 47. We are not talking about Batman, even though you are wearing that shirt right now. We are talking about another TV show, but before we get into that, how are you today on this fine Tuesday evening, Brian?
Well, because of the temperature fluctuations in good old Wisconsin here, I've been plugged the past couple of days. Uh, for a while I feel fine, and then I get plugged up again. But I think I usually go through this every spring. The month of March is always hard on my body here because temperatures get down to the 20s at night, and they get up to the 50s during the day and drop back down to the 20s, and there's rain mixed in there every once in a while, maybe some sleet. Uh, Even though we never did get that snowstorm last Wednesday, which was nice, but yeah, it's hard on the body. If I sound a little stuffed up on the podcast today, it's because I am. So, but I'm looking forward to this episode. We're going to kind of have a light and happy podcast today, talking about one of my all-time favorite TV shows, and I'm referring to M.A.S.H.
And before we jump into that, you know what? Sports time. March is ending. I'm looking at the playoff picture for the NHL right now. It's looking kind of good. Division wise for the Minnesota Wild, I'm saying actually, hold on. All right. Well, I guess they're still in contention now that I read it. They're number 4 in the standings right now for the Central Conference. I have no
Well,
idea.
they're in a good spot right now. If the season ended right now, they would be the first wild card, and they would play the Vegas Golden Knights on the road, which is okay. The Wild have actually been better on the road this year than they have been at home. Uh, I am planning to go to a Wild home game on April 6th when they play the Dallas Stars, which is kind of uh, profound in a way, since the Dallas Stars used to be the old Minnesota North Stars. So I've never seen the Dallas Stars. I saw the Minnesota North Stars plenty growing up in St. Paul in the 80s. So I'm looking forward to that game. I'm sure it's going to have lots of playoff implications as the season is winding down here with less than a month to go.
And with that being said, is that what we're doing for next week's episode?
No, I think we'll wait one more week so we have a little better idea what the playoff picture is going to look like. Because I want to go back to the 70s and talk about the Minnesota North Stars. I can remember watching playoff hockey with the North Stars on several different occasions in the early 70s uh, and the late 70s. They weren't good enough to make the playoffs in the mid 70s, but I certainly remember them playing the St. Louis Blues in a couple of different years in the early 70s. They played the Flyers one year, um, which was a pretty good series as well. And then in the late 70s, 1979, they made an incredible run where they knocked off the defending NHL champions, not state champions. I've been watching a lot of state basketball lately, and I'm going to be talking about that here. Probably not next week, but the week after that, and then episode 50. We'll talk about that a little bit later today in this podcast about hopefully what's going to partake in that.
Wait, did you say state basketball? Because I thought you were a basketball fan. So what are you referring to exactly? Like March Madness?
Uh, the Minnesota State basketball tournament was last weekend, and a team that I used to follow and cover when I was in radio in the 80s, the Alexandria Cardinals, made it to the state tournament. This is boys basketball. Um, of course, your mom, my wife, graduated from Alexandria High School way back in the 70s. So we both watched the game, the championship game, on Saturday afternoon. They played and beat Mankato East to win their first ever state high school basketball championship in the state of Minnesota. So that was a lot of fun for me to watch that game.
Wow. I'm actually kind of surprised to hear that because I was on the phone with my brother, Eric, your son. And he was so into I thought he was joking right away, but he was so into women's basketball. Like this new kind of off-season 3-on-3 league that they were doing. And a lot of the games are played here in like in Florida in the Miami area. And like tell me about all these like these two top female basketball players I had no idea of. And like I said, I legit thought he was messing with me for about like 5 minutes. And I was like, oh wow, he's really serious. Like he's a really big fan of that. So hearing him talk about playing basketball and then watching him work on his golf swing blew my mind the other day. And now hearing you talking about basketball, this is such a weird year for me. This is such a weird week. That's not that anything's wrong with it. We were just never really basketball people growing up. We paid attention to Lindsay Whalen when she played for I think the Gophers, right? Like the college team.
Uh, well, she was a Gopher, yeah, but she was also a Minnesota Lynx.
I thought she got drafted by the Phoenix Suns or the Phoenix something. Like
The Connecticut team, are they the Connecticut Suns? I don't remember.
maybe.
Uh, she was drafted by Connecticut, and then she played there 3, 4 years, and then came back to the Lynx and anchored the 4 or 5
Right.
WNBA titles that the Lynx won.
That's right. For us, kind of always hoping the Vikings or the Twins do something. That's right. The Lynx were like the team,
Yep.
WNBA in a while. And like that was a really big focus. Like they crushed the competition. They smashed everyone. They mashed over every single team that came up to them, which leads me to today's episode when Sweeping the Nation in the 70s was a TV show called M.A.S.H. And we're going to start here. I have no idea. What does M.A.S.H even mean? What's that? That's an acronym for something, right?
Well, it sure is, Andrew. It's Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and what that means is these makeshift hospitals. Basically, they're in tents. During the Korean War in 1950, 1951, 1952, they could up and move in a moment's notice. As if they were located in a spot that uh, where enemy fire would suddenly threaten the hospital, they could fold up everything and move to another location. That's why they were called a mobile army surgical hospital, M.A.S.H for short. So there were different M.A.S.H units all over uh, the the country of Korea, where the war was. Between North and South Korea. The United States was there. This was for real. The United States was there to protect South Korea against the North Koreans, and and that's really about as much as I know about that war. Um, it was at the time it wasn't really classified as a war. It was uh, the United States were helping South Korea in what they called a police action. Um, but it was a war. You know, the United States got involved in something uh, for a couple of years, and then peace was eventually proclaimed, and they were able to get out of there. But lots of people died. I mean, war is war, and it wasn't a police action. I mean, we were maybe over there to help South Korea, but it turned into a war, and MASH was a TV show that it was a comedy, as most people know. I'm sure most people listening are aware of what MASH is, and it was a comedy. But there were lots of episodes that were really serious as well, and really made you realize of the reality of war. and how terrible it is. And one of the funny things is, Andrew, is when M.A.S.H started in 1972 as a television show, the real Vietnam War was still going on. So a lot of people were confused. They thought the show was about the Vietnam War, not about the Korean War, some 20 years earlier. So kind of an interesting thing, and we're gonna get into all these details, and then of course share what I remember of watching M.A.S.H in the '70s, and of course we'll talk about the finale in 1983, uh, and what a big deal that was as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into like not not like take over like 2 to 3 hours explaining this television show, but you watching it, you remember it, your favorite episodes of it. I'm gonna ask this question right off the bat. Is this all in hindsight? Or were you watching this war show while you were a kid in the 70s?
Oh yeah, I mean M.A.S.H started, like I said, in 1972, and it was based off a movie. Uh, M.A.S.H, the movie, was in 1970, and I can remember as a kid, I always used to look in the daily paper because they would have movie listings at all the Twin Cities. Growing up in St. Paul, all the Twin Cities movie theaters, and I used to go to this movie theater called the Uptown. It's on Grand Avenue in St. Paul, and I don't remember how I learned how to look in the paper, but I think my mom probably showed me. I would look in the paper to see what was playing at the Uptown so I could ask if I could go to a movie or not. But I remember seeing the poster design for the movie M.A.S.H. It was basically somebody making a peace sign, like you see me holding up here, but on the bottom of the hand there was two very shapely women legs that were coming down like this. So you had an actual hand holding a peace sign with women's legs uh, figured in, or cropped in on the bottom of the hand, and you can look up that movie poster for M.A.S.H 1970 and see this. And it was one of the first movies that were ever rated R. So uh, that meant no one under 17 was allowed to see this movie, R being restricted. So I wasn't able to see the movie because um, the movie was about being a doctor. It was basically about three doctors, is what the movie was about, based in the Korean War in 1950. And there was lots of sexual content, lots of language, and stuff like that. That's why it was rated R. So I, to this day, have never really seen the movie, Andrew. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I don't even think it's really been shown on TV because they would have to cut out quite a bit. Um, but they decided in 1972 to take the movie and make it into a weekly TV show, but they wanted to do something different with it because at the time, comedy shows were kind of sitcoms were changing. They weren't the normal sitcoms like I Love Lucy and the Dick Van Dyke Show. I mean, the times were changing. This was the early '70s. Coming off. Last week we talked about hippies and stuff and the Jesus movement. So 1970 and 1971, 1972, times were changing. Uh, Sitcoms like All in the Family were no longer just straight comedies. There was some kind of a social message to it. Certainly, the Mary Tyler Moore Show was popular in 1972. Uh, Mary Tyler Moore being about a woman, a single woman, in her 20s, living alone, having a career job. Women's lib was real big at that time. Women learning to express themselves as members of society, and so comedies were starting to uh, have a social message to it. and so they figured, well, let's do that with M.A.S.H. Not let's not have a straight comedy, but let's actually have a message about war and how terrible it is. Since Vietnam was still going on, they thought this would be a good time to do that. So they when M.A.S.H. first started in 1972, and I never watched it when it first started, Andrew, because it was on Sunday nights on CBS uh, opposite Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom, I think is what it was called. It was on every Sunday night, and sometimes they would show a cartoon. Sometimes it would be some other kind of family movie or something. So so I never saw M.A.S.H. because it was up against uh, the Wonderful World of Disney, which was on Sunday nights. By So M.A.S.H. finished like 46th in 1972 for the whole television season, one spot behind the Brady Bunch, which was kind of wrapping up by that time in 1972. I think they went one more year, but M.A.S.H., even though they finished pretty terrible, it was renewed for another year. But in 1973, they were a little smarter about it, Andrew, and they put M.A.S.H. on Saturday nights in between All in the Family at 7 o'clock. Then M.A.S.H. was on at 7:30, and then Mary Tyler Moore was on at 8 o'clock. So they put M.A.S.H. in between two top TV shows on CBS at the time, and all of a sudden M.A.S.H. became the fourth most watched TV show in 1973.
That's so funny how you and I always have like comparisons. How was that MASH movie, the poster, kind of the first movie posters you ever remember seeing as a kid?
Well, no, because I had learned to look in the paper for movie listings, and you would always see something that as a 10-year-old kid, a 9-year-old kid, you were starting to pick up on sexuality and things that maybe weren't appropriate, um, and you would see these things and kind of stare at them because it was new. It was something you knew you probably shouldn't look at, but um, there was other things too I can remember, like the I don't remember the name of all the movies now, but The Exorcist. I can remember seeing the movie poster for that, and it just looks scary. The shadow of a minister in a street lamp, and yeah, I can't really think of them all right now, but there was stuff that was scary, there was stuff that was provocative, but yeah, every day in the paper I would look at the movie listings uh, to see what was going to be at the Uptown Theater and if I could go or not. So I can remember seeing Vern Gagne doing a drop kick, advertising the movie The Wrestler. So um, have we ever done a show about that? A podcast? We should do a podcast about the movie The Wrestler maybe sometime. Um, so yeah, it was a big deal to look at the paper and look at all the different movie posters that they had printed in there. Uh, Back then, that was more common than it is now. I don't really even have much for movie posters anymore. I mean, I know they still make them, but you don't really see them in the newspaper under the movie listings like you used to back in the 70s.
No, that was definitely something. When we did our episode of Brian's song a few weeks ago, I asked you about the wrestler towards the end of that movie. And you touched on it a little bit. We have not done a full episode on that. And which I was getting into that because like I was saying like how the similarities we have sometimes. My first movie poster memory, one of them was your VHS tape of Good Morning Vietnam, which is also a war movie. So that's why I was wondering if that was the first one you saw. And now that you mentioned, whenever I'm at like a half price books or FYE or something, I've always have seen that movie cover. I always see the movie cover of M.A.S.H. which I never knew what it was until right this second. I never paid attention to it, but I seen the peace sign with the female legs, and then some movie cover. I think it's Jack Nicholson, and he's like, it's like his face like all stretched out like in smoke or something like that. If that makes any sense, or if that's ringing any bells.
You mean The Shining?
No, it's man, I cannot think of it right now, but it's so funny how I can picture those two movie covers so much and never knew MASH was one of them. And I think it's Jack Nicholson. I could be way off. I will see if I can find it later. But so speaking of like that was a movie, you said you never seen it, but it was on TV. Whenever a television show gets my opinion or my attention, it's normally like a character or a theme. Were you into like war stuff, or was it the looks of a like a visual look of a character? Like what made you want to start watching MASH?
Well, I was a pretty avid watcher of Hogan's Heroes at the time, and Hogan's Heroes ran from 1965 to 1971, I think. Uh, and they had a really good run, and that was straight comedy. I mean, there wasn't really too much serious about Hogan's Heroes. It was just pretty much straight comedy. So I guess when I started watching MASH, in again, I didn't watch it in the first season, but in the second season, I started watching it, and I was expecting like a Hogan's Heroes type of thing, but it turned out that it was quite different. I mean, there was comedy, but there was also a serious side. I mean, the the scenes that they would show in the operating room. I mean, you would see the surgeons with red on their gowns and on their gloves and stuff as they were doing surgery. And even though obviously it's not real blood, but the implication there is that yeah, this is war, and they tell jokes and they do pranks and stuff during the times when they're bored and don't have surgery. But during the surgery scenes, there was no laugh track. I mean, they M.A.S.H didn't even want the creators of M.A.S.H didn't even want a laugh track, but CBS insisted on it, so they compromised and had a laugh track during the non-surgical scenes, but whenever they were in surgery, there was no laugh track. So that was their compromise in the early years. Uh, and then later M.A.S.H didn't have a laugh track at all, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So um, you kind of knew that this was different. This wasn't like Hogan's Heroes that was just comedy from start to finish. This was there was it was comedy, but it was also a serious side to it. You know, where the surgeons would maybe get caught up in what was going on, and the jokes would stop, and maybe there'd be tension, or people would get mad at each other because of the complexity of what they were doing. I mean, it was they weren't the ones at war. They were the ones fixing the people that were getting hurt in the war, so they could go back to the war again. And a couple of the episodes even touched on that all these guys were doing in the M.A.S.H unit were repairing soldiers that got shot up so they could go back to the front and fight some more. And you know, the absurdity of it when you think about it, is it's very profound, because you have this TV show that's supposed to be a comedy, but yet it's letting you know that hey, this really happened. This is war. This is what they did. The surgeons would fix soldiers, and if they weren't too bad, where they'd have to be shipped back home to the United States, they would be shipped back to the front lines and fight some more, and maybe this time uh, get killed. So it's like they were repairing soldiers so they could go fight some more, and maybe not even live after that. So M.A.S.H definitely was a comedy that had a dark side to it, and I can remember picking up on that pretty much right away when I was watching it in 1973 and through the rest of the 70s.
Man, this entire week, I didn't do like research, but like this whole entire week of like me thinking of us doing this podcast, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm exhausted. I was thinking of Hogan's Heroes the entire time. Holy cow. And now that guy, I just typed it in. And I'm like, wait, I didn't know Elliot Gould was in Hogan Heroes. And now it's all clicking to me exactly why you want to do this show. Because I know you're a fan of Hogan Heroes, right? And
Yeah.
like Hogan has like, that jet black hair. He was like a man's man, and the whole show was about him. So watching MASH, who was like the main character in your eyes?
Well, the main character in M.A.S.H definitely is Alan Alda. Uh,
Okay.
he he played Hawkeye Pierce, the chief surgeon, and he was on the show for uh, all 11 seasons. M.A.S.H was on from 1972 to 1983, and Alan Alda and Loretta Swit, who played uh, Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan, were the only two actors that were on the show from start to finish. Um, Only one actor was actually in the movie and went to the TV show, and that was Gary Berghoff, who played Radar in both the movie and the TV show. But he didn't last the entire 11 years on the TV show. He left after season 8. Uh, so yeah, just two actors, Alan Alda and Loretta Swit, went from start to finish on M.A.S.H.
So, why did the laugh track end? Like, why was this such a comedy show that got famous and then it almost went backwards? Were they just already losing like the ratings, losing in the ratings, so they decided to just do something new?
No, it really had nothing to do with ratings. It was tremendously popular, and the laugh track. I'm not really sure when the laugh track ended, but M.A.S.H started to change uh, at the end of season 3. Um, and I think I talked about this in a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I don't even remember why we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. But at this time, by 1974, I was watching M.A.S.H on a regular basis. And the final episode of season 3 it was supposed to be a happy episode where the commanding officer, uh, which was played by McLean Stevenson, was going to be leaving the show, even though he had 2 years left on his contract. He wanted to leave the show. He was doing other things. He was hosting the Tonight Show whenever Johnny Carson was on vacation, uh, and CBS was going to create another show for him called Hello Larry, and so he wanted to leave M.A.S.H. And they knew about it ahead of time. So they wrote a final episode, and had this grand party, and he hugged everybody goodbye, and he got on a helicopter to fly to Tokyo so he could catch a plane back to America. And and so it was a real feel good episode, and I'm watching this, and I'm laughing at the jokes, and I'm tearing up a little bit because he's saying goodbye to everybody, and there's still jokes, but it was really heartwarming. And then the final episode, all the cast is in the operating room, and Radar comes in, and he looks shocked, he looks stunned, and and he says, "I have a message. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. It spun in. There weren't no survivors." And he turns and leaves, and there's this dead silence in the operating room, except for a scalpel. Somebody actually accidentally dropped it, and it hit the floor, but they left it in there because it sounded real. And everybody, none of the cast knew that they were going to do this. They shot the whole episode, and then the writers came in and said, "Okay, here's going to be the final scene." And Alan Alda is the only one that knew that they were going to do this. Uh, but none of the other actors knew that. They said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They were talking to the writers and said, "Are you really want to kill off a character? Even though he's not going to be on the show anymore, and instead of him going home to his wife and kids and having a happy reunion, you're going to kill him off." And so they did this, and I can remember watching this, Andrew, like it was yesterday. I saw it live, and when Radar came in and announced that, I was so shocked. And Loretta Swit was started crying, and whether whether she knew for real what was happening or not, I don't know. But it was captured on camera, and it was so real, and it just really shook you. And I can remember thinking, how dare you? I was watching this TV show for comedy and laughs, and I can remember being mad. Uh, I don't remember how old I was, like 14 or something, but I can remember being mad because they did that. Holy cow! I'm sucked into this TV show, and then they kill off a character, and and I knew he wasn't going to be on the show anymore, but why do that? Why suck me in like that and then hurt me? And CBS got all kinds of letters from people saying we're never going to watch M.A.S.H again. How dare you do this? And it was a huge uproar. But in season 4, things really changed because another character on the show, Wayne Rogers, decided he wasn't going to come back. He played Trapper John McIntyre, and so in season 4 they wound up bringing in John or Mike Farrell, who went the rest of the way. He went till the show ended in '83. He played BJ Honeycutt, and they brought in Harry Morgan. Now, people knew Harry Morgan from Dragnet. He was Jack Webb's sidekick on Dragnet for years, a cop show in the '60s. And all of a sudden, he's going to be at age 60. He's going to come in and play the commanding officer on M.A.S.H. And the whole show kind of changed after that. It became more serious. There were still jokes, there were still laughs, there was still lots of fun, um, but the episodes were told more stories. They were more real, and M.A.S.H really became a juggernaut at that point and was number one in the ratings pretty much every week from that point on.
Is it just because there's so much of like, I don't want to say controversial, but like, was this like one of the first shows that experimented that wasn't so organically predictable like a lot of shows? And by the way, side note, that movie poster I was talking about was Fear of Loathing in Las Vegas. Like, I always saw that growing up, that Johnny Depp movie. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I really remember that. Yeah.
that in the MASH movie poster, I always remember seeing. But back to my question, speaking of MASH, was that like like my question, was that the first show that was kind of not sitcom cut and dry, like canned laughter, you kind of know what's going to happen? Because now like Friends, The Office, um, I'm trying to think of other shows, Scrubs, like you know what season you're watching because it changes so drastically with the characters and the storylines. So was MASH the first one to do that?
Well, like I said, when M.A.S.H started, All in the Family was already kind of setting a pattern for that. So was Mary Tyler Moore, although those shows weren't so much life and death like M.A.S.H was. Uh, so the culture of TV was changing, and there was still stupid comedies in the '70s like Welcome Back, Kotter, and even Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, and you still had your straight, I guess, stupid comedies, Three's Company, and things like that. But MASH was different. It was a comedy, or it was titled as a comedy, but it was more. It was starting to get more dramatic, I guess, where every week you weren't really sure if it was going to be just a lighthearted type comedy or if it was going to be something dark. I can remember in season 5, and I just saw it like a week ago on reruns. Um, Up until season 5, Loretta Swit's character, uh, Major Margaret Houlihan, was like straight lace, focused on the army. Everything was army, army, army. She was always trying to better her position and maybe become a colonel or a general, um, and everything was about the army. And in season 5, there was an episode where the she was just having a tough time with her nurses and wasn't getting the respect that she deserved, and she had to spend the night in the nurses tent because her tent was being quarantined for another reason, and she didn't want to do that, but she did, and and found out some shenanigans that were going on, and eventually she just had this standoff with the nurses, and saying that she never feels welcome by the nurses, or they never share any of their personal problems with her, and that she doesn't feel welcome when she goes into their tent, and and by the end of the episode, she they kind of find a common ground, and the nurses warm up to her and invite her in their tent for some coffee and fudge and stuff, and you got to kind of see a human side of Margaret Houlihan. And it wasn't all army, army, army. The writers all of a sudden decided to put a human side on her, and for the rest of the run of MASH, through the next 5 6 seasons, she became more. She was still concerned about the army, and being the best head nurse she could be, but she was also had this human side, and MASH started to do that with all the characters. Instead of just being, women chasers, like Hawkeye was, and Trapper John was, they started to have more of a human side, and and it, they would take every character and do maybe one episode or 2 episodes just about that character to give them that human side, and MASH kept doing that right up until the end. And they were still adding people, like after season 5 or 6, when Larry Linville left the show, they brought in David Ogden Stiers, wonderful actor, Shakespearean actor, and they brought him in as this pompous uh, surgeon from Boston, and his only goal was to get out of this MASH unit and go to Tokyo General until the war was over, and he could go back to Boston and practice thoracic surgery there. And and for the first couple of years, he just butted heads with everybody because he was this pompous individual who had wonderful skills in surgery, unlike Frank Burns, who had left the show. But by the show's end, he was actually uh, close with Hawkeye and BJ and Colonel Potter and Margaret, and became a principal character of the show because MASH was so good at showing that everybody had uh, had weaknesses and had vulnerabilities, and you maybe didn't like a character for a while, but then you would warm up to him because MASH was so good at making these people human, uh, to what maybe you were transfixed on. They were a certain way, and then all of a sudden there'd be an episode where you would totally change your opinion of that character and warm up to him and have empathy for him. And MASH was just so good at doing that for from season 4 to season 11. And and yeah, it was. I stopped watching MASH for a while when I was uh, in, a senior in high school, going to college and stuff. I stopped watching MASH, but then I picked it up again when I knew they were in their final season in 1983.
So why'd you stop watching? Was it just a matter of what you were doing in life, or you lost interest in like the different characters?
Right. When I was a college student, uh, it just there were just other things going on, and so I kind of got away from MASH for a while. But when I knew they were in their final season, then I started watching it again.
So within their final season, do you want to jump to that right now? Or was it more so like,
No, we can get back to that in a little bit. I can remember one of my favorite episodes was I think it was the season 4 finale where they had the name of the episode was called The Interview, and the entire episode was in black and white because they had this war correspondent named Cleet Roberts, and he was an actual correspondent for I think it was News, CBS News, uh, during the Korean War, and he was long retired by the time MASH, the TV show, was on. But they still asked him if he would come on and do this episode. And basically what they did, and this was so clever, is they had Cleet Roberts interview all of the MASH characters. Again, this was all in black and white, but it was to make it look like it was being filmed for television back in the United States, so people could see these characters talk about the war and talk about how they miss being home in 1950, 1951. This would have been the early days of television too. Uh, so the writers of MASH gave Cleet Roberts. They wrote out all the questions, and and then when he asked the questions to the cast members, the writers allowed the cast members to improvise all their answers. So, in other words, the only script was for Cleet Roberts, the interviewer, uh, as he had all his questions in hand from the writers of MASH, but they let the actors just get themselves into their character and answer their own questions. And I can remember him asking Colonel Potter, "Do you see anything good coming out of this war?" And he just said, "Not a damn thing." And it was so good. It was like it was really Colonel Potter answering the question, but actually it was the actor Harry Morgan who got himself into the character and 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 felt like that's what Colonel Potter would have said was, yeah, not a damn thing. That not a good, nothing good is coming out of this war. And and one of the other ones I remember is he asked Father Mulcahy, who is played by the wonderful William Christopher. He asked him if he felt changed um, since he had been in Korea, and his answer, again, totally improvised, was, when you see a surgeon cut into a patient in the operating room, and it's cold, like it is today, and 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 when the surgeon cuts an incision in his patient, and the steam rises up from the body because it's cold, and you see the surgeon warming his hands over over the incision because steam is rising out of the body and it's 98 degrees. And he said, how can you look at that and not feel changed? And man, when I learned that that was improvised and that wasn't a script, I thought, holy cow, did William Christopher knock that one out of the park? And and there were so many things like that. Um, they asked Frank Burns if if again played by Larry Linville if he felt changed, and he said, "Oh, absolutely not. I'm still the same American I have always been." And credit Larry Linville because that was a character I never liked. I didn't like Frank Burns, and but Larry Linville played that character for 5 years and was probably one of the most hated men on TV because he was this hypocritical army major that really didn't have great surgical skills, and he didn't like Hawkeye or BJ or Trapper or whoever, and was always causing problems. But he played the character so very well, and didn't really, it's like being a kid and hating a pro wrestler that plays the role of heel uh, so well that you actually believe that he's just a jerk or a bad guy in real life. That's how I always felt about Nick Bockwinkel or Superstar Billy Graham. I just thought those guys were really jerks because they played the role so well. That's what Larry Linville did with his character Frank Burns on M.A.S.H. He played it so well that you just hated the guy. You wanted bad things to happen to him. You wanted Hawkeye and BJ to prank him all the time. Um, and the all the performances from all the people that were on M.A.S.H. were so dead on, and they were so wonderful that no wonder that show lasted 11 years. It could have kept going, but they all realized that they at some point they needed to end the show, and they did in 1983.
So is that interview episode your favorite episode?
It's one of my favorites. I mean, there's others too. Um, every now and then on Sundays, my wife and I, your mom, will watch. We watch M.A.S.H. we watch 2 episodes every Sunday at 6 o'clock because there's nothing else on, and I'm usually trying to do other things. Like Sunday nights, I'm trying to do dishes or laundry or whatever, and I'll see this episode come on, and I just go, "Oh, this is really a good one. I gotta sit down and watch this." And I basically sit and watch both episodes because there's always some good one on, and it might not be my favorite, but there might be a favorite scene or a favorite line, and I just want to see it because um, I've seen most of the episodes, and I think I like the episodes with David Ogden Stiers, the later years, better than the early shows with McLean Stevenson and Wayne Rogers and Larry Linville, uh, because the later episodes always tugged at your heartstrings a little more. It was funny, there was comedy, but there was also that dramatic stuff, and that's what made M.A.S.H. so good, and that's why M.A.S.H. lasted as long as it did.
With I was I know exactly what you mean. Like obviously my favorite show would probably be like I really like Friends. And even if I'm trying to get something done or I should go to sleep, I got work in the morning. But I really want to see how like Monica and Chandler get engaged, even though I've seen it so many times. Like that's definitely an example of like I'm gonna sit there and watch it because I remember the feeling of like the first time I watched it. And then especially if I'm watching with somebody else, you almost want to see their reaction. So it's kind of like it sounds like I've never watched MASH. I know of the bits and like the important scenes because Family Guy always does like a parody of MASH. Not always, but they've done a lot of MASH parodies before. And so that was definitely a thing that you could tell it's such an impactful show. And the only thing I ever knew about MASH was what you said. I could be wrong, but was this the only show that was comedy and then it became a drama?
Well, it was never classified as a drama. It was still listed as a comedy show or a comedy series right up until the end, even though the final episode was pretty much all drama. I mean, there wasn't much comedy in that final episode. Uh, but I don't know if MASH won many awards. I'm sure they probably won some Emmys. I know Gary Berghoff did win Best Supporting Actor in a comedy series for his role as Radar in 1977, I want to say. Um, but MASH was always listed during the Emmys anyway as being a comedy series. So um, their episodes were by by the time they got into season 9, 10, 11, I mean, you knew that there was going to be fewer and fewer laughs and that it was going to be more uh, touchy feely stuff. So people knew what they were getting when they tuned in to watch MASH, and everybody has their favorite episode. Uh, I can remember talking to different people that would go, "Oh yeah, I remember this episode that where BJ cheated on his wife," and yeah, that's boy, that really hit home with me, and yeah, there was just different things like that. There was also many people that were many actors, especially during the early years of MASH, before they were famous, that made appearances on MASH as either a wounded soldier or some kind of a crazy general or something. John Ritter, who later became Jack Tripper on Three's Company. He played a wounded soldier that didn't want to go back to the front, and eventually held a gun to Frank Burns because he didn't want to go back to the front. Ronnie Howard, who played Cunningham and also played Opie on Andy Griffin's show, and was Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. He had a bit on MASH. So did Shelley Long and George Wendt, who both was on Cheers later on. Uh, Lawrence Fishburne, wonderful African American actor, was on MASH for an episode. There was lots and lots of people that made appearances on MASH that went on to greater things. So MASH was kind of a springboard for a lot of people. I mean, if you were an extra on MASH, people noticed you. I mean, you were going to be seen by millions of people by the time MASH was done with its run, they were pulling in, close to 100 million people a week. Maybe not that much, but at least 75 to 80 million people a week were watching MASH. And by the time the finale was on, 120 million people saw the final episode in 1983, which was pretty much 77% of American TV sets were tuned to MASH for the series finale.
So you want to get into it, the series finale? Like, where were you? What year was this? What do you remember watching this live?
Well, the thing about MASH that's always been that's always been kind of attractive is that you you don't always know what you're going to see. You don't know if it's going to be a funny episode or a lighthearted episode or something really heavy or really dramatic, but you always looked forward to hearing the theme song during the opening credits. And there's not anyone in America that doesn't know the theme song. Even you, Andrew, you know the theme song for MASH. It's just an instrumental played on an acoustical guitar in B minor, and they created the song for the movie. The movie actually had words, but the TV show never had words for the theme song, just the guitar music. And the person that wrote it, I don't remember his name right now. I read it before we started the podcast, so I wouldn't forget it, but now I forgot it. But that guy, he writes this theme song for the movie, and it becomes the longest running theme song on a TV show. And that guy's worth million. He's a millionaire because he wrote this instrumental for the TV show. So everybody knows the song, and the name of the song, by the way, is "Suicide is Painless." Uh, so the M.A.S.H theme does have a name. It's called "Suicide is Painless," and Guy, I wish I could tell you who wrote it, but I just can't remember. And a lot of people think, where was M.A.S.H filmed? And it was actually in um, I might get this wrong, but it's in the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains, uh, north about 35 miles north of Los Angeles. So it's in the Malibu State Park is where they filmed M.A.S.H. And since it's in the mountains of California, it was always cold there when they did the filming. So during the scenes where they have short sleeve shirts on and stuff, the actors were actually cold because um, the filming was done in the mountains. I mean, that was their stage. That was their setting in the Santa Monica Mountains. That's where M.A.S.H was filmed. So I just wanted to throw in those couple of details before I started talking about the finale. And uh, before I get into that, Andrew, was there something that you wanted to interject while I take a drink here?
I had to actually look that up on YouTube right now. And again, I'm so sorry. I was thinking, I was like, I'm gonna hear the whistling sound. I'm gonna hear that happy whistling. Like, I was thinking
Oh,
Hogan Heroes
really?
again. Yeah, like only because like all the times I've gone home in the past few years, that's something that like I don't really remember Hogan's Heroes growing up as a kid, but you're definitely watching now. And like that was definitely in my mind. So I had to look up this M.A.S.H theme and I watched the intro video. It's kind of boring. Like it's kind of very low key considered to what was in my mind. But yeah, obviously a lot of people are fans of it. Like you can see the helicopter coming over like the mountain base. And my apologies, I was watching that video while you were talking. What state did you say they filmed that in?
It was uh, in California. It was about 35 miles north of Los Angeles, in the Santa Monica Mountains. So you can, whenever you watch M.A.S.H, you can always see mountains in the background.
Right.
So they're not actually in South Korea. They're north of Los Angeles in kind of the Malibu State Park is what it is now, and people can still kind of tour the area, and they do have a tent set up there where the mess tent would have been on the TV show. So people can go in the tent and warm up because it's like I said, it's cold there. Uh, Anytime you're near mountains, whether it's California, Colorado, wherever, I mean, it's at the foot of the mountains. It's still cold. I mean, mountains have snow on them for a reason because it's cold. So, yeah, it doesn't matter if it's California or or Montana. I mean, it's going to be cold when you're around mountains.
Now I'm looking at the MASH cast list right now. Would you have to say I would like not the characters, but the actors themselves, if they did other things or whatever you want to say, that who was your favorite? Like who's your
Well,
favorite like actor in this show?
yeah, Alan Alda by far is one of my favorite actors of all time. He's a very intelligent man. Uh, uh, Actually, I put him right up there with Steve Martin. Steve Martin, of course, was a comedian turned actor, but Steve Martin is, I love hearing him in interviews. He's probably one of my favorite people of all time. Whether a comedian, actor, whatever. A very intelligent man, and I put Alan Alda in the same category. He's just a smart man, and to listen to him talk about M.A.S.H or about anything else. He's just a well spoken, very intelligent individual. He expresses himself really well. and every time I listen to him or hear him in an interview, he's in his 80s now. Well, so is Steve Martin. But I always learn things. They have such a broad scope of things that have happened in their life and Hollywood and so far and so forth. And it's just fun to listen to him talk. Dick Van Dyke's another one. He just a wonderful, smart man. And Dick Van Dyke's like 95 or 96 now, but he still still is doing stuff, still shows up on acting gigs from time to time, and just I guess those three, they're very intelligent, they're well spoken, and Steve Martin, Dick Van Dyke, and Alan Alda, they're probably my three favorite people to listen to and watch on TV.
Have you ever met any of these people by chance or seen them in person? The cast of the show?
No, I never have. When Steve Martin was touring as a comedian, I always wanted to go see him. And when I was a sophomore in high school, he was at the St. Paul Civic Center, and I knew a couple of people that went to the show, but I didn't get to go. It was actually on a weeknight, if I remember right. Uh, so yeah, when Steve Martin was touring, it would have been fun to go see him.
He still is touring, I think. I think him and Martin Short are doing a show together.
Yeah, I'm not a Martin Short guy, so I probably wouldn't go just for that reason.
And he's kind of grown on me over the years. And I did want to say this. Look at this cast list. I went to a Miami Dolphins game once, and they were against the Buffalo Bills, and there were so many Buffalo Bill fans in the section I was sitting in front of. And every time the Bills scored, this old guy would like kind of come up, like they were all high-fiving each other. The Dolphins won at the end of the game, but this guy in this Bills jersey, but they turn around, kind of like waving his hands up like I can't hear you, Dolphin fans. And I swear it was Jamie Farr. Like I don't know like a lot of the M.A.S.H characters, but the guy who played Corporal Maxwell, like I only saw him because he did a cameo in that 70s show back in 2006, I believe. And like
Okay.
I swear this was Jamie Farr. I'm looking it up. He's still alive. Um I'm gonna look if he's like a Buffalo Bills fan. But as I'm looking at this cast list, I was trying to see if I recognize anybody who has done like something since. Um, and you know what? This is really weird. I looked that up and it says actor Jamie Farr, better known as from M.A.S.H, has a connection to the Buffalo Bills through his support of Kelly's Foundation, a charity to the Bills team. So now I'm really wondering if he was in Miami at that game. Huh.
Yeah, he might have been. Jamie Farr still does quite a bit of acting. I see him in commercials once in a while, and he'll pop up maybe on a TV show. You mentioned he was on Scrubs, and and I've seen him on other things as well. Um, he I don't know if he was maybe one of the younger actors during M.A.S.H's run. The rest of them have either passed away. David Ogden Stiers has passed away. Harry Morgan has passed away. McLean Stevenson, Wayne Rogers, they're all dead now. Alan Alda is still alive. So is Loretta Swit. Not sure about Larry Linville or Gary Berghoff or William Christopher, but yeah, a lot of them have passed away now. I mean, M.A.S.H went off the air 42 years ago. Matter of fact, the final episode was in February. Well, I'm sure people know this. February 27th or 28th, maybe, of 1983. Then they did try something called After M.A.S.H, which had Colonel Potter. Uh, Played by Harry Morgan. Jamie Farr was on that with his wife, that was Korean, and then William Christopher, who played Father Mulcahy. But that only lasted 1 year, and there was talks about making a show about radar as well, but that never materialized. So the final episode was 2.5 hours, and I was in, of all places, Sacramento, California, when I saw the final episode. I I had just left St. Paul, and I had a job waiting for me at a Foot Locker shoe store in Palo Alto, California, and I had made it to Sacramento, uh, where my uncle Paul lived, and I I found his house in Sacramento and spent the night there. And it just happened to be the Monday night of the series finale of M.A.S.H. So I watched it with with my cousin Allison, and uh, one and only time that I've seen Allison, but uh, she knew who I was, you know, based on family conversations and stuff, and so she was, you know, she was more than happy uh, to sit down and watch M.A.S.H. with me, and you know, we talked about family and stuff because she knew nothing about all her relatives and cousins in Wisconsin, and then all of a sudden I show up and you know, we go out to Burger King and stuff, and then we watch M.A.S.H. In her living room with my uncle Paul, and so yeah, I saw the series finale in Sacramento, California, of all places, and certainly didn't see that coming. But that's where I saw the final episode of M.A.S.H.
Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched M.A.S.H, we're gonna talk about the last episode in the season. Not like that's what the focus on it. The focus is on the show itself. But this had so much up and down, starting with the pilot in 1972 and the final goodbye. Goodbye, farewell, and amen is what this title for this final episode is. As mentioned, 2 hours long on television. This was February 28th, 1983, Monday evening that this aired on CBS, I believe. So episode 15 of season 11 is As Time Goes By, where Margaret seeks contributions for a time capsule. Don't know if that really related going into episode 16, but it's like one of the top rated episodes of all time. Um, do you have you only seen this the one time, the final episode?
I have seen it. I've seen bits and pieces of it um, in other other time frames over the years, but I've never sat down to watch the whole thing again, and not because I don't want to, just because it's 2.5 hours, and it takes a long time, and it's a complicated episode. It starts with Hawkeye being in a, a hospital facility for somebody that uh, is maybe has some mental issues or insane. Uh, and we find out halfway through the episode that Hawkeye had been on a bus with a bunch of local nationals, and and the bus had to. It was at night, and the bus had to stop and turn off its headlights because there were snipers in the area, and this one woman was holding a chicken that kept clucking, and Hawkeye told her to keep that chicken quiet because you know the snipers would hear the chicken and find them and shoot all of them in this bus. And eventually, we found out that the chicken wasn't really a chicken; it was a baby that this woman was holding, and she smothered her own baby to keep it quiet, so the snipers wouldn't find this bus and kill everybody in it. And Hawkeye went nuts after that, and and so that's how the episode started. But you didn't find out until about halfway through the episode that that's why Hawkeye was in this insane asylum. Um, but eventually, he went back to the M.A.S.H unit, and they found out that the war had ended, and they all said their goodbyes. Hawkeye and Major Houlihan had this long 36-second kiss on screen. Um, and everybody left and went their own way, and that's how M.A.S.H ended, and it was a tearful goodbye. Um, I thought maybe the writers were gonna pull something and kill somebody off because the war was still going on right up until the final moments of the episode where they declared peace, and all the surgeons were in the operating room, and you could hear the radio announcer say, and 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 there in any moment now there will be a ceasefire and there will be peace, and then everything went silent, and they said that, my friends, is a sound of peace. But the surgeons were still operating, and their peace didn't come until like 9 hours later after the last person had been operated on, and then over the next few days they had like farewell parties, and everybody was saying goodbye, and all the principal characters were saying goodbye to each other. So it was a good episode. It wasn't certainly the best episode I'd ever seen of M.A.S.H, um, but that's how it ended. I'm sure a lot of people listening have seen that M.A.S.H episode because 121 million people were tuned into that episode, which is 77% of all American households, which was absolutely unheard of at the time. Uh, and I think it maybe still holds the record. I'm not sure about that because I know a lot of other series have had finales like Friends and so forth. And I don't know if they pulled in those kinds of numbers. But what you have to remember is in 1983 there were still only 4 channels. There was no cable. Well, there was cable TV, but there wasn't a lot of it quite yet. It wasn't something that people had invested in. Putting a cable dish on your roof so you could get other channels. I mean, some people had that, but you had to have a lot of money. Most people didn't have cable in 1983, so there was still only 4 channels to watch. So that being said, certainly a M.A.S.H finale, everybody knew what M.A.S.H was going to be watched by 121 million people. Where something later, like the Friends finale in the 90s, or Seinfeld's finale, uh, maybe 120 million people didn't see that because there's more than 4 channels to watch, and and so that would probably be the reason that record by M.A.S.H will never be broken.
Were you you say you weren't really watching MASH, and then you started towards the end. After you're sitting there in Sacramento on this Monday night and that ends and that goes off the air, was there like, even if you were watching that close, was there like this weird kind of sad feeling that after all that time that like, oh wow, this isn't going to be on television anymore? Because reruns weren't really a thing quite yet, from my knowledge. So was that kind of weird knowing that like, oh, that's it? Like there's no more mesh? Or were you were you not that invested at the time?
Um, Not really. I mean, I wanted to see it. Um, my cousin Allison was more excited to see it than I was. Um, I kind of, I knew it was on, but I kind of wanted to visit with my uncle Paul and my cousin Allison. But she told me that she was going to be watching M.A.S.H. She wanted to see the final episode, and I was all for it. And but my mind was kind of focused on my next state travel was going to be driving through California down to or over to Palo Alto, and I was moving to San Jose so I could work in Palo Alto, which is not far from San Francisco. Um, so my mind was kind of focused on that, and I stayed in California for like 6, 7 weeks, and then moved to Colorado for my first radio job. So my mind was kind of on other things, and I wasn't really absorbing the whole M.A.S.H finale thing um, until until I went back to St. Paul later that year in 1983. I had stayed in Colorado maybe 4.5, 5 months, and didn't like it there, so I went back to St. Paul uh, by September of '83. And then I got more. I started hanging out with people that I used to watch M.A.S.H with, and kind of reconnected with those people, and started talking about what they thought about the season finale or the series finale, and then I kind of got more back into it again. So uh, yeah, I saw the finale. 6 months went by, and then I kind of started catching up with people that M.A.S.H was important to uh, 6 months later, and watching more reruns and stuff at that point.
Okay, so you say you didn't watch the show after MASH. Did you watch the 1984 spinoff titled Walter that Radar was the star of?
Well, now my understanding was that never got off the ground. That they were going to do that spinoff called Walter, based on Radar O'Reilly, and that show never happened. So I'm not sure what you're looking at there, but if it did happen, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay, yeah, my apologies. It was like the third attempt for a spinoff that they were doing. And yeah, I guess it was kind of the first episode aired July 17th, and then like that was also the final episode that aired July 17th of 1984. So yeah,
Okay.
apparently it didn't take off at all. And I know you said after MASH was the thing, but you didn't really watch
I
that.
did. I did watch that. That aired in October of 1983, and by then I was living in St. Paul again. And my best friend told me that this show was going to happen. So I did watch the first episode, which was kind of cool because you saw Colonel Potter uh, uh, back home in Missouri, walking up. You saw the yellow cab drop him off, and he walked up the sidewalk to his wife, who was waiting on the porch, and he was dressed in his army his good army clothes, and carrying a suitcase, and gave his wife a hug, and so that was kind of cool. It was kind of like M.A.S.H goes. All the M.A.S.H characters go back to living in the United States, and you got to see three of those characters do that. So that was kind of fun. Um, but I think I maybe watched one other episode that Radar was on, and that was it. The show just didn't really capture my interest a whole lot to keep watching it.
Yeah, it was two seasons of this sitcom called After MASH. I didn't even wasn't even aware that I not that I watched MASH that much that they did a spinoff that lasted that long. Looking up some MASH awards, um, because if it was on that long, now I'm curious. That's had to won some primetime Emmy Award, Outstanding Comedy 1984, or sorry, 1982, 1974, and then a bunch of like actress, music, actors. Would you say that MASH is like the top five of your favorite television shows of all time?
Oh yeah, TV Guide uh, a few years ago. I guess it was more than a few years ago. They said M.A.S.H was probably the eighth best TV show of all times, and I don't know who number one was. I think I know who number one was, but M.A.S.H was listed as the eighth best TV show of all time. I would put it higher than that in my personal opinion. Yeah, M.A.S.H definitely would be top five. Um, and I really, off the top of my head, I don't really know who I would put number one or two or three or four. M.A.S.H might even be my number one. I don't know. I've never really thought about that, Andrew. It's a great question. There's a lot of shows that that I enjoy watching. I enjoy watching the old Andy Griffith shows in black and white because the shows were just simple back then. They weren't anything about drugs, sex, and rock and roll. I mean, they're just about maybe Opie would break a street light. The whole episode would be about that, and
Idiot.
it, that's but that's what shows were like back then. And I Love Lucy, even though I was never really a big I Love Lucy fan, shows like that um, were fun to watch because they were they were simple shows, and they were non-offensive shows, and TV really changed in the 70s and into the 80s, and even in, let's see, 19 early 1990, or maybe it was more. Yeah, it was probably closer to 93, 94. There, when public nudity started being on TV shows, there used to be a show on called NYPD Blue, that every week you'd see a naked butt, and so TV just really changed from the 60s through the 70s. I didn't really watch a lot of TV in the 80s because I was always working nights then. Um, but into the 90s, when Friends and Seinfeld and all those shows were on, things were just really different. And uh, so I can't really, I know I really digressed here from my favorite TV shows, but I wouldn't say anything that I watched in the 90s would be like a top five favorite show for me.
Is it just like, were you always entertained by MASH? No matter if you kind of went off, because so I'm a fan of the Monkeys. And when I was a kid, I really liked the Monkeys TV show, and that was funny, right? And then they had the canned laughter. So sitcom kind of slapstick type material. And then towards the end, there wasn't canned laughter anymore. I don't know why, unless it was off and unless it was like a live TV audience that I wasn't aware of. But and then you were just watching a show that was I keep on going back to Scrubs. Scrubs is a comedy show, but they write their comedy kind of like The Office and Parks and Rec, where it's funny, but like it goes on, it goes on, it goes on. And then there's shows like Friends and Seinfeld, where they have, and The Cosby Show was the first one I remember seeing as well. Happy Days, where there was like a live studio audience. So they took their pauses. All of a sudden, I'm watching the Monkeys taking their pauses, and I didn't feel like I was watching a comedy anymore because there wasn't no laughter. So it wasn't that entertaining towards the end. So was MASH always just entertaining no matter what direction they were going for you? You were just that like committed as a fan?
Yeah, MASH really didn't need a laugh track. It was, I sometimes I think that producers use laugh tracks uh, to help the audience or the TV audience realize that something is funny.
Right.
And and MASH really didn't need that. And once it became more of a serious show and they got rid of it, uh, they really didn't even need it in the early days. But I suppose just to be safe, they wanted to keep it, except for the scenes in the operating room. Um, I yeah the research I didn't really say anything about why CBS was insistent on having a laugh track, because the producers of the show really didn't want that. They didn't want a laugh track. Obviously they couldn't film it before a television audience because the whole show was filmed on location. It wasn't in a studio anywhere. Um, so I think All in the Family at that time was being videotaped before a live studio audience. I'm not sure if Mary Tyler Moore was, uh, but there were some shows that started doing that. Instead of having laugh tracks, they were filmed before a live studio audience. I know All in the Family did. I'm sure other shows did. The Jeffersons maybe. But but yeah, I really don't think shows need a laugh track. Hogan's Heroes always had a laugh track. A couple episodes didn't, and then that was weird because you'd get used to hearing the laugh track, and when an episode didn't have it, then it was like, oh, this is stupid. So um, yeah, I'm just not a big fan of laugh tracks, because I know what's funny. I know when I should laugh. I don't need a canned laughter to tell me when I should be laughing.
No, laugh tracks are kind of annoying. Canned laughter is kind of annoying. That's why I do appreciate a live studio audience. Obviously, Friends, every episode was from a live studio audience. I believe that 70s show was as well. The first time I ever really, really, really noticed it was the Cosby Show because the final, like the series finale, they're like dancing in the living room and then they just walk off set and like they're being filmed walking off set going towards the exit and then you see the audience and they're clapping. I'm like that was the first time I ever realized, holy cow, there was like real people there like watching all these takes and these outtakes. And there's this YouTube thing of the Big Bang Theory, how people take off the soundtrack because they put canned laughter in there, and how that show is really not that funny without them like kind of crutching on all the canned laughter. And I'm pretty sure there's a handful of shows like that too. And that's why I think, even though I'm not a fan of M.A.S.H watching it, no matter what, they just stayed like, nope, this is what we're doing. This is what we're putting out there. This is funny. This is serious. This is meant to be low key funny, kind of like a little, like, just a little giggle instead of like on full on laughter. And now that I'm trying to, I can't think of any other show that's gone so up and down and like committed to what they were putting out there no matter what. Like, hmm. Definitely a
Yeah,
very I can't think of a versatile show other than MASH, now that I sit here.
yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm sure there's shows out there uh, that have kind of had their back and forths and their ups and downs with deciding how to do that. Um, but but yeah, I guess I don't like I said I've never been a fan of canned laughter. I don't think it's important to do that. Um, I think shows that are filmed before a live studio audience um, is probably the best way to go. I mean, if you want real laughter during the taping of a show, I think that's the way you should do it. Roseanne was taped before a live studio audience, but that was a big deal in the 80s. You mentioned that 70s show, which is one of my favorite shows of all times. That probably would be a top five for me. Uh, that they it really it lends itself well to a TV show if it's done right. You know, obviously a show like Scrubs could not have a live studio audience, but then that show moved so quickly that you didn't need canned laughter. You didn't need a live studio audience because Scrubs was done so well that you didn't need any of that stuff. I mean, you could laugh on your own. You didn't need to laugh along with anybody because you were always laughing at something crazy thing that was going on during the show. Scrubs was very well done, very underrated show. I think of all time. I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves. But none of these shows, of course, are on the same level as M.A.S.H. And it probably will go down as one of my all time favorites, top five, maybe even number one.
Anything else you want to say, wrapping up today's episode about the television show MASH?
No, I think we pretty much covered MASH. I wanted to go back to last week real quick here. We talked about the Jesus Revolution, and you and I talked during the week, and something you said uh, kind of kind of it didn't upset me or it didn't strike a nerve or anything, but it made me realize that sometimes people get uptight about certain subjects, and I just want to remind people that the purpose of our podcast is to talk about things that were relevant in the 70s, relevant to America, relevant to the world, and relevant to me. I mean, the purpose of the show is my memories of the 70s and how I viewed or reacted to certain things that happened in the 70s, whether it was something as simple as watching a TV show like M.A.S.H. or or listening to a John Denver song, or watching the Vikings play every Sunday. All things that we've covered on this podcast over the past couple of years. the Jesus Revolution was a topic that I chose because it was a relevant topic in the 70s, and it wasn't anything that we chose to offend anybody or try to convert anybody. It was just a topic like all the other topics that we've had on the 70s podcast. So I just wanted to put that out there, and uh, I'm glad we got to do that topic last week. And you had asked me, I think towards the end of the show, did the Jesus Revolution uh, do anything or when did the revolution maybe quit? And there was obviously people that considered it a fad, and it was a big deal for a while. But more than anything else, the Jesus Revolution or the Jesus movement, as what it was called at the time, was something that gave people hope because there was so much darkness coming out of the '60s and people looking for something and and even if it was only for an hour or two on Sunday morning, and there was things going on during the week as well, and people getting baptized, people just needed hope. Things were so dark coming out of the '60s with the Vietnam War and the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and it was a dark time for America, and people needed hope, and that's what it was all about. It was just that people needed hope, and I don't know if I accentuated that enough last week, but that's what was happening in the '70s, and again, it was just it was an event. It was a topic that we covered on our podcast last week, and it basically led to a new way of spreading God's word from the traditional Catholic, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, and it was a new way, and it just launched a new way to spread the word that's still continuing to this day, and I just wanted to put that out there that. It took a lot of criticism until Billy Graham, who was considered the evangelist of that day and of all time, came out and said that you know the the movement, the as some people called it, a hippie movement. um, he said, does it is it perfect? He said, well, absolutely not, but no religion is, and that's the thing, is it kind up until that time there was always denominations. There was Catholic, Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, but this kind of launched a non-denominational movement where it just became about the Bible. It didn't matter if it was Catholic or Lutheran or any of that other stuff, any other denomination. This became a movement for non-denominational churches, which is what the country needed, and we still have that to this day. So the Jesus Revolution, when you ask that question, Andrew, what came of it? It basically launched the non-denominational church, which is still alive and well today. And Billy Graham even advocated it, saying, "Hey, when after Jesus rose to heaven and the 12 apostles had to go about spreading the word, he said that was far from perfect. They didn't have buildings or churches back then. It was basically built from the ground up, and he kind of equated that, saying this isn't perfect either, but that's what they're doing. They're starting a whole new type of spreading the word, and that's where non-denominational churches came from. So I just wanted to explain that a little more, and also add that uh, we're not trying to convert anybody or make a message or anything. It was a topic that happened that changed the world.
I appreciate you bringing that up and I guess making that clear. I don't think it was unclear, but like other than the Super Bowl and I guess Miracle on Ice, we've never picked an episode that was like by design or like relevant to what was going on in the world now or anything. It's just kind of something random every week when we film here, and we hope you guys enjoy it and feel comfortable because, as you just mentioned, they wanted people they were in a time and a place where they needed hope and to feel comfortable, and that that happened during the Jesus movement. And even with us talking about M.A.S.H, I know that's a weird comparison, but it's like, hey, why did they have a soundtrack? If this was a show about war, maybe they thought nobody was really going to watch it unless it was kind of comedy based and kind of light-hearted instead of just here's a brand new show about people getting like a war surgical. So like definitely with the 70s and stuff going on, rather if it's like war or assassinations and all, like everybody wants to feel a little bit better about stuff, about current events without having it be completely ignored. Just me kind of throwing that together. And yeah, we're not talking about current events ever. We're just talking about the 70s. What you remember the 70s. That is so cool, me hearing that story. You probably remember that living room or that room you were sitting in Sacramento watching the series finale and like kind of what it looked like and who you were with. And it's just like I remember exactly where I was when Michael Phelps won the 2008 swimming like the he like beat the record for the gold medal in the Summer Olympics. I remember clearly where I was during that. So it's just like that's what I like about this show. We can talk about stuff that people maybe seen or read, but it's your recollection and like what you retain from it after all these years. And that's what that episode last week about the Jesus movement was, and this week's episode of M.A.S.H. Any other feelings or thoughts? And you can wrap us up for this week's episode number 47.
Well, again, MASH was a unique show because it started when it was a show about the Korean War in 1950, 51, 52, but it it started when the Vietnam War was still going. So I think that kind of confused people, and maybe that's why they decided that it should have a laugh track. Uh, it maybe should be a lot of comedy, a lot of prank comedy and stuff. Even though it was about serious stuff, um, they still they still had the mindset that people were touchy feely about war because Vietnam was still happening, and Vietnam didn't stop until 73, I think. So MASH had already been going a couple of years before Vietnam stopped, and I'm pretty sure that was the time frame. And so, yeah, maybe that's why you asked me why did they do a laugh track. Maybe that's why, because they didn't want it to be too serious because people were still touchy feely about what was happening in Vietnam, and they didn't even need a TV show making making us think, or getting us more depressed about what happened in Korea 20 years earlier, because people were dealing with what was going on in Vietnam, and people were dying left and right, and Vietnam was not a good situation. Is something America never should have got involved in, and eventually when they pulled out of Vietnam, uh, the North Vietnamese took over South Vietnam, as soon as the U.S. left there. So, I mean, we didn't win anything. We didn't gain anything. It was basically just not a good situation for America. So, when MASH was created, it was probably a good thing that they had a laugh track and tried to keep a light and happy, at least for the first 3 years.
Maybe I should we add a laugh track to this show?
I
Yeah.
don't, I
Yeah.
don't,
That'd be
but
some extra editing I would have to do.
but again, thanks for listening. And again, I just want to emphasize, whether it's MASH or the Jesus Revolution, all this is just my opinion and your opinion, Andrew, and we spitball back and forth about things. None of this is set in stone. If and if something strikes a nerve with you, or you want to go back and look up an episode of MASH, or you want to check more into the Jesus Revolution and maybe make a change in your life, hey, that's great. That's you know we're not trying to do anything but entertain, but if something comes of it in your life, hey, more power to you. We just appreciate that you listen and tune in every week because this is a lot of fun for us. and we certainly enjoy doing the show and having you as our audience and coming up here on episode 50 and what is this one, Andrew? 47.
Yeah,
So
correct.
I think so. About 3 weeks. Uh, we hope to have a special guest with us that we talked about having last fall, but there were some things going on in my life with my wife being injured, and also the fires in California where our guest lives. Hopefully, we will be able to get him on the podcast. Steve Gelder, who has been in Hollywood for years, he's done a lot of acting, both on stage and on TV. He was my roommate in college, good friend of mine. He knows my family. Um, he's traveled with my family for different things. You, Andrew, back in your days of being a pro wrestler, he traveled with you to Chicago or somewhere in Illinois. I don't remember where it was, but he knows the family. He knows both you and I very well, and we're looking forward to having him as a guest for episode 50 and probably 51 too, because I'm guessing that it's going to be a long podcast, so it'll be something you'll probably have to split up.
Yeah, definitely. I'm shooting him a message right now. Just seeing how he's doing with the wildflowers. And, we're going to do a hockey episode soon. I'm trying to think of something we could do next week. I feel like we just talked about something and I forgot what I mentioned, what we could do an episode on.
I mentioned the wrestler, but I really, I think that would bore people to death because it wasn't a very good movie. It was exciting for me because I was a mark at the time, but uh, yeah, we'll come up with something else. But I'm going to sign off from Wisconsin. Andrew, you go ahead and tell us about our sponsors and bring it home.
You have a good night, Brian. Thank you so much. And we thank you guys so much for listening every week here on YouTube, where you can subscribe. That's That 70s Pod with Bryan Lee. That's 70s Pod on YouTube, where you can also look up the M.A.S.H theme and some M.A.S.H highlights. You can look up Brian's song, Miracle on Ice, all these things that we have talked about, you can find on YouTube. But I am just pitching That 70s Pod with one of our sponsors that we have because Godly Father Apparel sold out of everything. So our one major sponsor we've had since day one is KingLineNutrition.com with promo code Lockhart. That's KingLineNutrition.com, promo code Lockhart. Go on there for the best snack and ever edible cookie dough, or you can make real cookies out of it. I'm working on the Samoa's cookies right now. Such a great flavor, and there's so much more that you can go to when you use the promo code Lockhart and get a discount KingLineNutrition.com. We really appreciate you guys listening to every week. As Brian signed off from Wisconsin, I am signing off from Orlando. Go listen to the archive episodes, and we hope you enjoyed this one. We have episode 50 coming up real soon, and we are going to crank them out every week as we record. We enjoy it, we appreciate it, and we hope you guys enjoy it and appreciate it as well. That's 70s Pod here, but right now in 2025, stay safe, everyone, with travels or springtime and holidays and prom, summer vacation, whatever you want to say coming up. Just stay safe out there. We did mention we don't try to we want everybody to feel comfortable and feel safe, and maybe this thing. We hope this episode or this show is just something you can listen to while you're doing your traveling, cleaning, laundry, at work, commute, whatever the case is. Enjoy it every week and enjoy your evening. We'll catch you next week for episode 48. Thank you from Orlando. That's 70s Pod. Have a good night.